think I got to show Merrill Reese this. You guys have seen this a couple times. This was at one of Jerome's golf tournaments after he passed. Seth Joyner, Clyde Simmons. Let's see who was there. We all showed up, of course. Here's the donor holes. Clyde Simmons, Seth Joyner, Andre Waters, Keith Jackson. I love Keith Jackson. We played against Keith when he was at OU, Jerome and I. Look at that bad puppy, though. Some of you have seen this. Hey Xander, bring up because he loves golf, and I thought he would love this. This is a whole sponsorship here. Here is our friend Merrill Reese. Merrill, the city of Brooksville said, Sills, we found this in one of the sheds, and we thought you'd like to have this. Some of the guys signed it, Clyde Simmons and Seth.
Boy, something.
Look at that there. Yeah, that's one of the whole sponsorships.
How about that? It's wonderful.
Yep, Brooksville, still to this day. So they go like this. We thought you'd like to have it.
I'd love it. I can't picture Jerome golfing without like whacking down.
Nope. Well, you could if you could use a scooter or if you could use a motorcycle, you could see him doing it with anything with speed. You know what they used to tell me, Merrill?
What?
That Jeff Fisher, who was the defensive line coach, and you know what? The Vets parking lots are so long, the old vet parking lot, right? Jerome would get on his Kawasaki and he would just go up and down those parking lots in lunch break, doing about 130 miles an hour. It used to make the coaches insane when he was doing that. Because I believe Jeff Fisher was your D-line coach then.
No, he was actually the secondary coach.
Okay, he was, yeah. Well, Jeff was like, God, he used to just make everybody nervous.
Jeff was a great guy.
That was a great team.
In fact,
all right.
But there were coaches, Dan, that I looked at then, and I said, they're going to be great head coaches one day. They're going to be successful head coaches. And there are three that I really felt confident would be successful. One was Jeff Fisher. One was John Gruden. I knew they would all be great and successful. And the other was John Harbaugh. And all three of them became great head coaches. But on the other hand, there were other coaches who I thought were terrific coaches, but they weren't head coaches. There's a difference between a great coach, a great teacher, and what it takes to be a head coach.
Were you surprised that Sean McDermott's done well up in Buffalo? Are you shocked that he's doing that well?
No, I'm not, because he's bright, he's diligent, he's tough when he has to be, but overtly, he didn't have that same kind of outgoing personality. But you know what, Dan, it takes a lot of different personalities to win. The most important thing is that a man remain true to himself. For example, you couldn't find two more different people than Andy Reid and Tom Landry. I mean,
too different.
I mean, or Dick Vermeil and Tom Landry. Dick Vermeil, who cried at basketball games, and Tom Landry, who showed zero emotion about anything. But they were both great. Or in that day, Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry. I mean, Vince Lombardi was roaring and tough and loud. Tom Landry could give a player a look, and that was enough.
You know, when I was in Dallas and he brought me to Dallas, I had been coached by Jimmy Johnson when I was in college. And then obviously Jimmy coached me in Dallas the next year. But I had never been around somebody like that. That was so meticulously organized, but never, ever got there was never highs and lows. I'll tell you who he kind of reminds me of a little bit, and it's Tony Dungy. Like Tony Dungy never got too high, never got too low. John Lynch told me a story about him, Merrill. They were 0-8 in the Buccaneer locker room the first year, and he was saying that everyone in the locker room was like, holy cow, we haven't won a game. And he walked in the room and he could see the faces. And Tony Dungy looked at everybody in the locker room. He goes, you know what you guys see? You see 0-8. You know what I see? You're this close. You're this close to your first win and turning this thing around. That's what I see. That to me is the mark of a great coach. You never lose your poise.
Well,
you know?
that's a big thing. That's a big thing. And that's what the great ones have. Look, I think Doug Peterson is a wonderful coach, and I think he's going to show it this year.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Merrill, first day of training camp is tomorrow. 10 a.m. is the first practice. They're reporting now. How many years now is this for you as you prepare for another Eagle season?
It's my 48th season as the play-by-play broadcaster, but I guess you could add 5 years when I went to training camp to do pre- and post-game shows, and 1 year color. So, I mean, probably 52 years or 53 years of going to training camps.
How do you prepare for a season?
By being there, by watching every day, by not taking training camp performances as anything other than what they are, install sessions and practices. I mean, I still cannot believe that we find reporters, written journalists or print journalists, if there is print anymore, or actually broadcast journalists, people who come back and want to tell us that Jalen Hurts was 13 for 16 in a or 7 for 19 in a training camp practice. It means nothing. None of this means nothing, and they don't hit. We see very little hitting. There are a couple of days in a training camp where they actually have some thud tempo, but very little hitting. So I watch, and I will just mentally call some play-by-play just to get my process going again, and number recognition, particularly with the new players, get that down pat. But I do not take what I see as an indicator of how good this team is going to be. Some people do. I don't.
Merrill, how important is it for you to have a personal relationship with the players that you're going to be broadcasting on? How do you cut that line, and how do you not go too overboard? Because you have to have a balance a little bit when it comes to being critical on the air, or constructive, or again, giving their flowers on the air. How do you keep that balance? And do you think it's important to have a personal relationship with the players you're calling?
That's a really good question, Dan. Because I don't have the relationship for the most part that I once did. And I don't think any of us do, because we don't have the access that we once had.
Okay.
I mean, for example, practice, not during the training camp, but practice and during the training camp, there's no locker room open. There's training camp sessions, and then they bring selected players under the awning, under the tent, to be mass interviewed. So you don't get to know that. And also, don't forget, 40-something years ago, the players and I were the same age. So Cindy and I would have them over, a lot of guys over to the house for dinner. And in those days, before I wore out my knees, I was a pretty high-level tennis player. And there were a few players on every one of the Eagles teams who, in fact, for example, Ken Dunnick, who was a tight end, and Max Runninger were both guys who loved tennis. And they didn't tell anybody, but I would meet them. Don't forget, you would have 2 sessions. You'd have the morning session at training camp in the afternoon, and it was out of Westchester in those days. And we would sneak, I'd meet them. I'd pick them up in front of the dorms, and they'd jump in the car, and we'd run, and we'd play tennis for an hour. And then I'd drive them back to camp. And, they'd sneak in a back entrance and get ready to go to the afternoon session. But that's long gone. Now I'm, old enough to be their grandfather. But the fact of the matter is, I still am able to have a great relationship. I mean, the 3 weeks ago when they announced that I was going into this year's Hall of Fame class with the Pete Rozelle Award, I got the nicest congratulatory messages from players. Boston Scott, who's with the Rams, wrote, "Bro, I knew you could do it." Alex Singleton, who's now with the Broncos, sent me the nicest words. I mean, I heard from guys all over the country, and I do a radio show once a week, and I get a player as a guest. But it's you do not have the access. But look, I have a wonderful relationship, I'm happy to say, with Jalen Hurts. I can go over to his locker, and the two of us can sit and chat. He feels very comfortable with me, and I really like him. He's a wonderful young man. I think the world of him. But by and large, there are a lot of guys who I know to say hello to, but we don't have the access that once upon a time we did.
Merrill, do you think that your relationship with Mike Quick and how you gel with him has a lot to do with you, first and foremost, covering him as a player, and then as a friend, and then as a broadcast partner? You kind of checked all the three boxes because you would know his quirks, you would know the buttons to and not push, you would know what he was looking at because you covered him as a player. How much do you think that dynamic has helped you in that broadcast team that you have between you and Mike Quick, that you covered all three of those angles?
Well, a couple of things there. Number one, he is one of the guys who I would go over to his locker and chat with when he was a player. And he was always very, very courteous and responsive. But I got to know him so that when they were looking for somebody to fill that role, I was able to be a part of the selection process, and I was in his corner because I liked him and I knew that he could speak well, and I knew the kind of person he is. You used the word quirk. Dan, he doesn't have any quirks.
Okay.
I mean this. If you wanted to meet the most quirkless person, I mean, his emotions run the line, as somebody once said, from A to B. I mean, Mike is never too high, never too low. In 26 years, we've never had a bad word between us. We both have a love for golf, and we do play quite often. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I can hit the ball where he hits it, or that I'm as skilled as he is. But if you put the handicaps down there, we can have a little fun. And also we're friendly. I'm friendly with Mike and his family, and Mike, and Mike calls the house, and Cindy answers the phone, and he says, "Hi, hun." It's a family. It really is a family. We are during the season, we can finish each other's sentences.
I love that. And that's why that broadcast team is what it is. When I'm, like I said to you, I listened all last year, really for the first time each game. And you can see that you guys, I mean, it's almost like a breath. And that's the kind of partner you have. You want to be able to have the other guy finish your thought. You start the thought, he finishes the thought. And that's how you go through those plays. I think that's a great broadcasting.
There are players, and I think you know this. I'm not naming names, but there are a lot of players who go directly from the NFL to the networks over the years. And some make it, and some, after their name wears a little bit thin, are dispensed of. But the ones that make it are the ones who take it as a serious job that requires constant study and dedication. Mike Quick comes prepared with 2 pages of handwritten notes, and so do I. And during the preseason, which people talk about, are you nervous before the Super Bowl? I'm more nervous before a preseason game because you have 90-man rosters to memorize, and also because in the third or fourth quarter of a preseason game, you're going to see a lot of people who are only known to their mothers. I actually write in a column, I actually write topics that I can discuss with Mike Quick when we get to a third or fourth quarter. Now, you don't want a phony excitement. I never go when people say, "Oh, you make a game exciting." No, I don't. Never. I hope I can transmit the excitement of a great play or an exciting game, but I never want to create excitement. That cheapens it. But I do have an obligation as a broadcaster to maintain interest in that broadcast. And that's where that preparation comes in, where Mike and I can get into I remember one time, this is years ago under Andy Reid, we're in the beginning of the third quarter. Mike said, and Mike is always looking at his internet, and he said, I've got some news. I said, hold it a little bit longer because we'll need it. And he goes, all right. And then he says to me, Merrill, you sure you don't want me to break this? In a little while, Mike, it can't be that big. A little while. Finally, I said to him, all right. I said, Mike Quick has something to say. And Mike Quick comes on and he says, well, the Eagles just signed Michael Vick. And I go, whoa, whoa. Why didn't you tell me sooner? But Mike is always right there, and he is meticulously prepared.
I got to tell you, I don't know if I've told you this, but I'm the one that broke it nationally.
Did you?
I was in Tampa, and Tom Shaw was the trainer for Vic, and Tony Dungy came over from Tampa with me, and we went to Orlando. And if you know the story, they gave him his physical in Orlando, and he got his physical, and Andy Reid was actually there because it was a Monday night game that story got broke, because I went on my radio. If you can Google it, I'm the first guy nationally, and there was Michael Vick, and I'm sitting there, and I looked over at Tom Shaw, the trainer who was training him, and he goes, he just signed with the Eagles. And I'm like, get out. I was so afraid to go on the air. I had it for 4 hours, and I wouldn't go on the air because I was the only guy that knew it. And I'm going like this, Merrill. I go, Andy Reid signed him? Sure enough, I go, okay, I'm going to do it. Because there he was. I saw him signing the contract. Sure enough, that night on Monday Night Football, I forget who was playing. Might have been even a preseason game or something. And I remember John Gruden coming on the air going, yeah, the Eagles have just signed Michael Vick. And I couldn't believe what I had watched, because I saw Reid with him, and I saw the physical, and I saw the whole thing. They got on an airplane and they left. And there I was sitting here. Merrill, I had the story for 4 hours. I knew it at 11, but I didn't say it until later on.
You know, you have to be careful. Now, many, many years ago, a player called me. I was doing the morning sports at WIP along with the games. So I'd get in at 5 o'clock in the morning and go on with the sports at 6:05, 7:05, 8:05, and 9:05. And I got a call at 2:30 in the morning from an Eagles player. And it was in the middle of the off season, into the off season. And the player called me and he said to me, Merrill, I've got news that I'm giving you. He said, I found out firsthand that tomorrow Dick Vermeil is resigning as the Eagles.
Whoa.
And I said, really? And there was no indication of any of this. I said, really? He said, Merrill, I'm telling you the truth. So now I can't sleep. And I go into the station that morning and I said to the news guys, I said, guys, I just got a tip that Dick Vermeil is resigning as head coach of the Eagles today. And they said, Merrill, are you sure? And I had to think, am I the victim of one of the great pranks of all time? But I had trust that this player wouldn't do that to me. And so I said, I'm going with it. They said, okay, you are leading the news. So they came on with the news and came right to me for the lead story, which was that Dick Vermeil was resigning today. And suddenly the news director called, the general manager called, and they said, do you know what you're doing? We're calling the Eagles and they have nothing to say about it. They're not giving us any credence. And everybody in the city was getting reports, and some people were saying that there is an erroneous report on WIP that the Eagles are that Dick Vermeil is resigning as head coach. Don't believe it. And within hours, the Eagles announced a press conference where Dick Vermeil got up and tearfully said that he was burned out.
Man, I know, I'm with you. I mean, that sphincter muscle gets a little tighter when you're the only one in the room and you're like,
you know,
wait a minute.
fun. But I believed it, you know? And
Yeah, no, because you trusted your source. And like you
and
said,
you
Merrill,
get,
I always tell people the two things that when you're in broadcasting, always be over prepared and never take the stuff people say about you personal. And you're going to go far in this place.
well, I'll give you another one to that. But do you know who the player was? He later became my color man for 14 years. Stan Walters. Stanley. Oh, okay.
Stanley.
You just said something about over prepared. I have another half of that. Over prepare and under deliver. Over prepare, but don't ever go into a broadcast and say, well, I've prepared it, and even though it's not appropriate at this moment, I'm going to say it anyhow. I don't care if you throw away 2 pages of stuff that you'll never use. Over prepare, under deliver.
Absolutely. Make them want more. Let me ask you a couple questions about going into this year. Why don't you hook me up on this, Merrill? You're the guy that's around these people a lot. Hurts and Nick. Is this overblown that they have a fractured relationship?
Yes. I don't see any fractured relationship at all. You know, Jalen is
it's
not
being reported that these two guys didn't see eye to eye last year when it came to play calling.
well. Does any quarterback and coordinator ever see eye to eye on every play? So it gets blown up. I mean, if you expect them to come marching down the hall singing "Kumbaya," you're not going to have that. But if do they respect each other and do they work well together? You know, and Nick always praises Jalen, and Jalen's not the kind of guy who's going to say, "Hey, this guy is the greatest. That guy's the best." He's just very close to the vest. He's not a big talker. It's just not Jalen.
Do you think that Jalen Hurts has to endorse Nick publicly for that relationship to seem like, because he never has? But you make a point too. I mean, Merrill, you say it. That's not his nature. He's not a guy that's good. He's never said anything like that about Saban. He likes Saban. He loves Saban. He's never said anything about Lincoln Riley or any of them guys.
No, it's not his job. I don't think he has to do anything but win.
Okay, fair enough. Saquon Barkley's impact on this football team, in your opinion, will be great, will be an upgrade to what they've had the last 2 years, or yet to be determined on what his role is?
I think that he will. Now, don't forget they've had good backs.
Miles Sanders had 1,300 backs last year. DeAndre had 1,100.
Yeah,
and both of them were Pro Bowlers.
But the biggest difference is probably that you're talking about a 3-down back who can stay in and catch passes on 3rd down and block and do some more things. My only trepidation about Saquon Barkley, and this is something nobody can answer, is that he has had his share of injuries.
Last 4 years. He's had 2 significant that put him out of missed time. Out of the last 4 years, he's had 2 of those years that made him miss a couple ball games.
If he stays healthy, he'll be sensational. He'll be he's running. He ran well as a Giant, and he's running behind an offensive line that is 6 times as good as what he had with New York. I think he can be sensational. I think he's a great back. But again, I hope he's a great back for at least 15 games.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. 2 last questions here for you, Merrill. Look at what's going on now with Joe Douglas, and I'm sure you probably know who Joe Douglas is, obviously working in the Eagle organization. Yep. I mean, personnel guy. He's done a nice job up in New York when it comes to the draft. But boy, I'll tell you what, how do you do this? And you got to give it to Howie here. Howie moved off of a guy, and he moved that problem knowing full well he must have known, Merrill, that he wasn't going to show up to Eagle training camp because he wanted between 20 and 27 million. He moved that problem up to New York. He got a potential second, most likely a third, depending on how this thing works out with playing and also playing percentage. But he's moved that problem up to New York now. Now he's holding out. and you're like this with Joe Douglas. Not that that's an Eagle problem, but holy cow, you don't have a contingency plan? You let Huff walk out the building. The Eagles have him. You didn't want to pay Huff. Okay, well, now you're back in that position, boy. So you got to give it to Howie here. He really read the tea leaves right here on Reddick because he wasn't going to do what Javon Hargrave did. Hargrave played his last year on that one-year deal, got that 11 sacks in that $20 million deal in San Francisco. Howie must have known he wasn't going to do that, Reddick.
You know, I have to come clean on this one and tell you that I have a personal feeling in this. Now, I think Howie's terrific. Howie's done a great job. He's one of the great general managers and talent evaluators in the National Football League, and he did what he had to do. However, I also have to tell you that you asked me about getting close with players. Hassan was one of the guys I got very close with over the last 2 seasons. In fact, 2 seasons ago, the year they went to the Super Bowl, I thought he could have easily been a case to be Defensive Player of the Year. That's how good he was.
He was.
He was utilized differently in the defense last year. They had him dropping back in coverage. That's not his thing. He's a pass rusher, but he's one of the best people you'd ever want to meet. And we both are former Temple Owls, so we have that in common. But Hassan is a great guy. He's not a jerk. He will never pull a football team apart. And once he comes to terms with the Jets, he'll go in there and give you everything he has. I don't think he pulled back last year, that he didn't try or any of those things. I think it was more his utilization than his attitude. I think he's a great guy. I really do.
What do you think went south in that relationship? He had 27 sacks, Merrill, in 2 years. You have to go back to Trent Cole and Reggie White to find guys that had that kind of production. I mean, like you said, he destroyed that NFC Championship game. He was the best player on the field on both rosters in that game. I mean, he took 2 quarterbacks out, ended the 49ers shot at winning that game.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, all of a sudden, like you said, he started the season out with a cast on his hand last year, and they utilized him poorly at the last 4, so he still had 11 sacks. But why do you feel, maybe just an opinion from sitting there outside the NovaCare gates, why do you think that relationship went south? Was it just, again, maybe Vic didn't like that he was a one-dimensional guy, maybe that, he didn't like to drop him, and Vic likes to drop those guys?
I don't think it's Vic. I think it was based on last year's performance, and I think it was when you have a salary cap, you have a lot of decisions to make as to how you're going to implement it. And I think that Howie was really in a situation where he was doing what he felt was best for the allocation of what he had to work with for this team. And he thought that in bringing in Huff, that he could replace some of those sacks and still have money to do other things. I mean, they spent a lot of money on Saquon Barkley. I mean, he's put together a very, very talented team. I think it's, Dan, I think going into the season, this doesn't mean they're going the distance, because we also know that that the NFL, and we've said it many times, is a war of attrition. But the fact of the matter is, you also know that to win, you have got to be fortunate, and a lot of things can happen. But Howie has put together one excellent roster.
The only question I have going into this is that in 22, you had immense veterans all the way into defensive tackle position, at the corner position, Epps in the safety. You had Gardner Johnson back there. You had a lot of veterans on that football team. Sayamalo at the right guard spot, a younger Kelsey and a younger Lane. With this situation going here, Merrill, my question is, that offense, there's no doubt, one of the best offenses that I've seen. It's a Pro Bowl offensive football team. You've got a lot of projections on the defensive side. Will Quinton Williams be the right pick? Was it Teron Arnold? What is Cooper DeJean? What is his role going to be? Can Gardner Johnson recoup what he did in 22? The linebacking core. There's a lot. I mean, one thing they haven't done, Merrill, they have not replaced TJ Edwards or Kaiser White. Both of those guys, Kaiser had 120 tackles that 22 season, and TJ had 160. Those two guys were awful productive, and they've still not been able to replace those two guys after 2 years. That's my only concern, is that there's more question marks heading into this year on that side of the ball. There's less on the offensive side, in my opinion. So they've got to get, like you said, they've got to get lucky and stay healthy.
Well,
That's would be mine.
you are right. You know, they're going into camp with about 18 linebackers, and
That's crazy.
there are some interesting names there. One of which is Devin White. I mean, he was a great player at one point, and then
He
injury.
was an all-pro.
Another guy who has not been healthy, but is extremely bright and was the best linebacker in his senior year in college was Nakobe Dean. These guys have stepped forward. And I think, now I say this without watching him on this level, and I do love his name, so I'm prejudiced, but I want to see, I think they stole Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in the 5th round. He's not his father. He's not that kind of player. He's faster. He's not as powerful, but he's smart. He's athletic. He may show something. There are a lot of, let's see what they have this year.
Absolutely, no question. Last question for you. This is a personal question for me. Did you enjoy broadcasting the 80s Eagles, the 90s Eagles, the 2010 Eagles, or the current Philadelphia Eagles right now? What era was Merrill Reese, was his favorite era to cover for the Eagles as a broadcaster?
You know, I don't have a favorite era. I love them all. I look forward to the season with the same enthusiasm that I look forward to the 1978 season, which was my first full season as the play-by-play broadcaster. I love all of those eras. But I can tell you, there was no more entertaining era than when we talked about your guy Jerome and Buddy's Boys. That was a soap opera every day. That was at times a comedy thing. I mean, it was Jerome arriving with 6 minutes to go before he was declared late for training camp, when all of a sudden you heard this rumbling, and it was Jerome driving a blue Ford Bronco with a boombox blowing out the windows, and he drives in, and there's all these mothers and kids on the lawn, and he jumps out of his truck and he yells "blank Westchester" and runs into the lawn, runs into the dorm. I mean, there was something going. Reggie White every day. These were characters. And Buddy, you never knew what Buddy was going to say. When the media came to Buddy at training camp and said, "Well, Buddy, is everything going as well as you would expect?" He'd say, "No." He said, maybe we'd sign somebody if the guy from France would come back. He was talking about Norman Brayman, the owner, who was vacationing. You never knew what he was going to do. So these are more corporate type, less off the cuff, less wild errors, but you still meet a lot of wonderful players, a lot of talented coaches. They're all great. I'll tell you this.
Hopefully we're able to get him back. I want to hear him finish that thought. Can you imagine having Buddy Ryan and Bill Parcells game week, Eagles and Giants, with those two guys at press conferences? Can you imagine what those press conferences were like pre-week of the game on Sunday with the Giants? Now, this is my era. So those two guys were probably those two guys. I got to hear Merrill finish.
Am I back?
Yeah, go ahead, Merrill. Finish it up. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that this team has the ability to go the distance. Do they lack something in the secondary? I don't know. I think those two, I think what they did was take a look and say our biggest weakness is defensive secondary, and they picked two of the best people they could possibly get in the draft in Quinn Jones-Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. I think you've got real talent there. And they went out and they brought back, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. That's big. Again, if he stays healthy, because he had his injuries too. And we talked about the young linebackers, and a lot of things that, listen, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, these are guys who are enormously talented, but they can't be talented and destructive for 8 games and then whittle away because they're not in the right condition. These are guys who've got to show that they can do what they do early in the season over the course of 17 weeks.
Merrill, I can't imagine what that was like for you when you were calling games or you were preparing that week of the Giants, when you had Parcells on one side and then you had Buddy on the other side, and you had these two guys doing their press conferences and the stuff that was said between those two teams. Because when I grew up, the rivalry wasn't Cowboys and Eagles. It was Eagles and Giants.
Yeah, but
That was for me, the rivalry. I never looked at the Cowboys as your biggest rival. I always thought it was the Giants because it went back to the Bednarik and Sam Huff days and that stuff. So that's how I kind of looked at it. I know the Cowboys are the rival, but I grew up with Bednarik and Huff. That was my rivalry.
Yeah, I did too. But in those days, let me tell you something. That Bednarik and Huff were two different eras, actually. Bednarik was done by after 1960. That was it for Chuck, and Chuck won championships in 1949 and 1960. But when you go back, you have to look at Buddy and Jimmy Johnson. Oh my goodness, those two! You talk about two guys who hated each other, or even Buddy and Landry. I mean, they were unbelievable. They were great. But
Merrill, I got to show you a picture of Buddy Ryan at our practices down at the University of Miami. What when you say about Jimmy Johnson, and you're like, what I never got was why Buddy and Jimmy ended up being these rivals. Because here, I got to show you this picture here. Here it is. So here's Buddy coming down to our practice. There's Jimmy. Okay. And those are our dorm rooms in the back. And we're sitting here. And here's Buddy Ryan. This was 1986, the first year that Buddy got the job. He came down. Norman Brayman's there because Norman had his Cadillac dealership in South Florida, right? And so Norman, I'm going to tell you how we knew Jerome was going to the Eagles. So Norman is here, Buddy's here, Jimmy's here, Butch Davis, Dave Wannstedt, myself, and Danny Stubbs, who ended up being an Eagle himself. We're all in the room. Buddy goes, "Let's go." First year he got the job from Chicago Bears when he came over from D.C. We're with him for 2 hours watching the 46 defense. He goes, "Silio, get your head out of your ass. See that right there? See that technique? You got to slide your hands over to the left. What is that? That's laziness because what? You're strong? You get in the NFL, God put you on your back." Jerome Brown, you keep taking plays off. This is why you won't be the 6th pick in the draft, which he ended up being the 9th pick. And then he goes, and he's sitting in here ripping us a new one. He turns off and he looks at both of us, all three of us, and goes, "Hey, you three guys, you Stubbs and Jerome, you guys are going to have the #1 defense." And we did that year in college football. You guys are the best I've seen. It's phenomenal. He came down in 87 and did that too. And I'll never forget, he put his arm around Jerome. This is 86. The following year in the draft, Jerome went to the Eagles. He goes like this: "If I have anything to do with it," right in front of the whole team, "you're going to be a Philadelphia Eagle." And this was before he did the salute in the Fiesta Bowl. And Jerome looked over at me and I go, "Damn, dude, the guy who ran the 46 in Chicago. I don't know what kind of head coach he's going to be. But I'll tell you what, that defense in Chicago is the best I've ever seen. And he wants you." And he hadn't even seen him play his final year. We knew right there. Norman Brayman goes like this. He looked over at Jimmy and he goes, "If I have anything to do with it, you're going to be in a #1 pick." Turned out to be, it was the 9th pick.
Do you remember who his very first draft pick was as head coach?
No. Wait, 86. Don't tell me it was Mike Mamul. No, that was later.
That was Ray Rhodes.
Oh, who would they pick?
The
Was it
night
that running back from A&M?
No, no.
Who was it?
He went on his radio show the night before the draft and declared that he wouldn't get anywhere near Keith Byers because he was a medical reject, and then drafted him first the next day.
What a dear friend of mine, and what a player. And I'll say this to you about, he was Alvin Kamara before Alvin Kamara.
Yeah.
Here's a guy that could get you 700-800 yards, Merrill, and then turn around and get you another 450 yards receiving and be that dual threat guy like that. He was so far ahead. If the Eagles of that era ever decided to do that one trade for that offensive tackle, I know some of them know that Mike Lachey, actually Keith Byers and
Jim
Keith Jackson,
Ohio State,
and a bunch of people had worked that deal out to get Lachey. Lachey wanted to be an Eagle, not a Washington Redskin.
But you know what? Their scouts told them that Jim Lachey couldn't play tackle, that he was strictly a guard. So Marion Campbell said, "Get me the best tackle you can get me." And Lynn Stiles, who was the personnel director, said, "Well, the best offensive lineman is Jim Lachey from Ohio State." And Marion said, "I said tackle." He said, "Well, there's a tackle on the board by the name of Kevin Allen from Indiana, and that's who they picked. That's who they picked, Kevin Allen from Indiana." And he not only was a bust, he got into some police trouble and ended up with some real problems after that. I think he was basically a good kid and straightened himself out, but he was never anything other than a marginal football player. Also in that draft, who they didn't take, where they picked Kevin Allen ahead of Jerry Rice, ahead of Al Toon, ahead of Jim Lachey, ahead of Eddie Brown. The list goes on and on.
One last thing, Merrill. I could talk to you forever and apologize, but Kevin Allen was a teammate of mine when I played in the World League. Soft-spoken, nice kid.
Yeah.
And he goes like this. And as you know, it was a sexual misconduct thing that ended up taking him down. He wasn't a really good – he came out of Indiana, and obviously he wasn't the player. Enormous. You talk about enormous dude. He is an enormous man. And I asked him, I said, "So did all that stuff go down with that one girl?" And he's like, "Well, it was a very unfortunate circumstance and all this and that." And I'm like, "Okay." And I said, he goes, "But man, I don't hold anything against the Eagles. It was my fault. You know, there were just misunderstandings." He goes, "But I didn't perform and I wasn't ready to play for those guys." And I really felt bad for him because he went on to play a little bit more in the NFL after the World League. But he's a good guy.
Oh,
it's
Buddy,
just unfortunate situation.
Man, but Buddy came in with like a tornado, and he brought them down to Tampa for a mini camp in the spring. And he looked at the players for the first time, and he turned to Michael Haddix, who was also a first-round draft pick. And the first thing Michael Haddix ever heard Buddy say was, "You look like some darn USFL guard." That's he was a running back. So, but words.
"You look like some USFL running offensive guard." Michael, yeah, like you said, I remember Michael Haddix. He was a running back out of Texas A&M. I remember that.
Oh my gosh! There's someone else who was trying to make the team, and I said to him, because Buddy and I really ended up, took a little while, but we had a great relationship. And I
said, "Is he your favorite coach?"
He's the greatest character. My favorite coach is, I just had dinner with Vermeil. But there's a lot of coaches that I love. They're a lot. I've been lucky with great coaches. The only one I didn't have any relationship was Chip. But the thing about it was, I said to Buddy about one of the players. I said, "You know, Buddy, he is a great kid." And Buddy said, "So is my son, but I don't want him playing for me."
Hey, I got to tell you what Jaw said to me about Vermeil. He goes, "Vermeil's the only guy that could cry making you run for 3 hours."
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. Keep that running going for 3 hours. We got another 2.5 hour practice, full pads.
Yeah,
but Draws is like this. He's like, "I've never seen a guy so emotional and love his players so much, but yet beat these guys into submission. He used to cry over making them run.
Yeah, but you know what? The thing about Dick was, to this day, all of his players are still in touch with him.
Yeah.
I mean, he hears about a guy having a tough time. He's on the phone to him. He's visited him. He really has cared. No coach ever cared more about his players as people than Dick Vermeil. He may have worked them to death, but I'll tell you what, he really cared about them.
You know what, though, Merrill, every time you call the house, though, I got a feeling that the true coach in that house is the wife, because she's the one that goes like this. It's Dan. And so, like, you know, Coach Vermeil goes, "How you doing, Dan?" Because I met him when he was a broadcaster. You know, he ended up becoming a broadcaster after he left the game for a bit. So I got a chance to know and meet him. And that's how we became friends and such. And it's his wife. His wife is a major force in his life.
Great. Carol's great. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I can't. Hey, by the way, the Hall of Fame stuff.
I know.
Are you going to be going to the Hall of Fame game? Are you going to be up there during that week?
I am going to. I'm pretty. We have tickets to go to the game. I hope so. We're going to leave next Thursday morning.
So are you going to be brought out to the middle of the field with the players?
I don't know that. I don't know what I'm going to do, but that I know that my first official duty is at the Gold Jacket dinner, and they'll introduce me as the winner of the Pete Rozelle Award, and they'll have a video with some of my calls, and then I get up and I speak for a few minutes.
You better get a jacket or at least a ring out of this.
Do you know what, Dan? They could put Hall of Fame on a Dixie cup, and I would be appreciative.
But Merrill gets his new ring out of a Cracker Jacks box. It's fine with me.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's the fact that I'm being included into this unbelievable fraternity that means everything to me. Any tangible evidence of it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for spending so much time. I look forward to the upcoming season number 48 as the official broadcaster, 52 around the organization, which is incredible. And now an inductee of the Pete Rozelle Award.
And you know what? I love it as much as I've ever loved it. And when people say, "How long do you want to do it?" my answer is forever. So
you want to use this thing kind of like a Supreme Court nomination where this is, hey, Merrill, this is a lifetime gig for you, right?
Right. I'm going to come on this year and say, "Hello, everybody. This is Chief Justice Merrill Reese."
We're coming to you live from Baltimore, not that crap hole in Washington, D.C. This is Chief Justice Merrill Reese for my 48th season.
That's it. Oh, my goodness.
Absolutely. Merrill, thank you so much. Hit them straight, my friend. I appreciate it.
I will, Dan. Thank you, and have a great day.
You got it. Our good friend Merrill Reese, the legendary voice of the Philadelphia Eagles, spending a boatload of time with us today. Hit the like button. I hope you liked that. I sure did. Keep it here, National Football Show.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.